Every global power has a low point. China's was the worst, and its recovery reshaped the modern world. Today, China is one of the most powerful nations on Earth. But just over a century ago, it was being carved up like a birthday cake by foreign powers. The country that gave the world paper, gunpowder, and the compass was forced to its knees, humiliated, invaded, and stripped of its dignity. What happened? How did China go from being the sick man of Asia to a superpower that makes the West nervous? This is the story of China's darkest chapter, and the comeback that changed everything. In the early 1800s, China saw itself as the center of the world. And honestly, it kind of was. The last Chinese dynasty, the Qing, ruled over the largest, richest, most populated empire on the planet. Chinese silk, tea, and porcelain were status symbols across Europe. The emperor lived in the Forbidden City, surrounded by luxury that made European palaces look basic. But China was confident. Too confident, if I may say. While Europe was going through the Industrial Revolution, building factories, railways, and modern armies, China stuck to the old ways. The Qing court believed they had nothing to learn from the outside world. Foreigners were seen as barbarians who should feel honored just to trade with China. This attitude would cost them everything. This period, Britain had a problem. They were obsessed with Chinese tea. I'm talking millions of pounds of tea shipped to Britain every year. But China didn't want anything Britain had to offer. They wanted silver, hard cash. This created a massive trade imbalance that was draining Britain's economy. So Britain came up with a solution, a twisted, evil solution. They started smuggling opium into China. Opium was grown in British-controlled India, shipped to China, and sold illegally by British merchants. At first, it was just the rich getting hooked. But soon, opium dens were everywhere. Millions of Chinese people became addicts. Farmers stopped working the fields. Soldiers became too weak to fight. Silver started flowing out of China and into British pockets. The entire Chinese economy was collapsing from the inside. The Qing government knew what was happening. In 1839, Emperor Daoguang sent a guy named Lin Zexu to the port city of Canton to stop the drug trade. Lin was tough. He didn't mess around. He wrote a letter to Queen Victoria, basically saying, "How would you like it if we poisoned your people?" But no reply. He confiscated over 1,000 tons of opium from British merchants and destroyed it all. He dumped it into the ocean. Britain's response? War. The First Opium War lasted from 1839 to 1842, and it was brutal. China had more soldiers, but Britain had steamships, modern cannons, and rifles that could reload fast. Chinese troops were still using swords, spears, and outdated matchlock guns. It wasn't even close. British warships sailed up Chinese rivers, bombarding coastal cities. Chinese generals tried traditional tactics that had worked for centuries, but they were useless against industrial warfare. It was like bringing a knife to a gunfight. China lost, badly. In 1842, they were forced to sign the Treaty of Nanking. This treaty was a disaster. China had to pay Britain 21 million ounce silver in compensation. They had to open 5 ports to British trade. Worst of all, they had to hand over Hong Kong to Britain. Forever. Just when you think things couldn't get worse, they did. In 1856, the Second Opium War broke out. This time, Britain had help from France. The excuse? A Chinese patrol boat stopped a ship that might have been flying a British flag. That's all it took. This war was even more brutal. British and French forces marched inland. In 1860, they reached Beijing and did something unthinkable. They burned down the old Summer Palace, one of the most beautiful buildings in the world at the time. It was filled with priceless art, books, and treasures collected over centuries. They looted it, then set it on fire. The palace burned for 3 days. China was forced to sign the Treaty of Tientsin, opening even more ports, allowing foreign diplomats in Beijing, legalizing the opium trade, and paying even more money. Christian missionaries were given the right to spread their religion anywhere in China. Stephen Platt, in his book Imperial Twilight, describes this period as the moment when China's self-image as the center of civilization was shattered. The Qing dynasty wasn't just defeated militarily, it was humiliated spiritually. Once Britain broke China open, everyone wanted a peace. France took control of Vietnam, which had been a Chinese tributary state. Russia grabbed massive chunks of land in the north. Germany claimed territory in Shandong. Japan, recently modernized itself, looked at China and saw weakness. China wasn't colonized like Africa or India. Instead, it was carved up into spheres of influence. Foreign powers controlled China's ports, railways, and mines. They ran their own courts and didn't have to follow Chinese law. Chinese people in their own country were second-class citizens. Signs in some areas literally said, "No dogs or Chinese allowed." The Qing government tried to modernize. They started the self-strengthening movement in the 1860s, trying to adopt Western technology while keeping Chinese values. They built shipyards, bought modern weapons, and sent students abroad to learn. But it was too little, too late. The corruption ran too deep. The court was divided between reformers and conservatives. The Empress Dowager Cixi, who held real power, cared more about keeping her position than saving the country. By 1900, the Chinese people had had enough. A group called the Boxers, officially known as the Society of Righteous and Harmonious Fists, rose up. They believed they had magical powers that made them immune to bullets. They attacked foreigners, Chinese Christians, and anyone associated with Western influence. The Qing government, desperate and confused, decided to support them. That was a big mistake. 8 foreign nations, Britain, France, Germany, Russia, Japan, the United States, Italy, and Austria-Hungary, formed an alliance and invaded China. They crushed the Boxers, occupied Beijing again, and forced China to pay 450 million tiles of silver in reparations. That's more money than the entire Chinese government's annual revenue. Odd Arne Westad, in Restless Empire, points out that this wasn't just a military defeat. It was a psychological breaking point. The Chinese people realized their government couldn't protect them. The legitimacy of the Qing dynasty was destroyed. In 1911, the Qing dynasty finally collapsed. A revolution led by Sun Yat-sen and others overthrew the emperor. China became a republic, but it wasn't the happy ending anyone hoped for. The country fell apart. Warlords carved up different regions and fought each other for control. The central government barely existed. Peasants starved while generals lived like kings. China, once the most advanced civilization on Earth, had become a failed state. And then things got even worse. In 19...